continuing our study through Ecclesiastes and coming into chapter 2. And last week, it was, there's the question, all of life is vanity. All of life is insubstantial and fleeting and passing away. And what are we going to do with it? How do we live in that? And for today, the preacher's message in Ecclesiastes, on the surface again, would seem like it's not much brighter. That it's not as uplifting as we might think, but that's only on the surface. And it's easy in a book like Ecclesiastes to kind of get lost in the, in the questions he's asking, and then miss the answers he's providing. And so the question that I begin with is, in what are you placing your hope? In what activities or pursuits are you seeking satisfaction, pleasure, or fulfillment? As we look around us and we contemplate the state of our lives and our society, it should be plain to see that we as a people are desperately seeking meaning in every pursuit we can think of. People are trying everything they can to make themselves relevant. And I'm sure we can all think of celebrities whose careers have waned and then have gone on. They've gone on to something else, or their popularity is fading. And then they do something outrageous to try to regain that sense of relevance or that public attention, right? And there are countless people who I call YouTube famous, right? These are people that have found, that are famous for something that they've done on social media, but not for anything really meaningful. And oftentimes those people become what they call influencers because they gather a following of people who are also looking for something meaningful in their lives. And whether it's celebrities or influencers, all of them at some point will, as that phrase goes, jump the shark. And if you're not familiar with that, it means that they'll reach a point where their popularity peaks and then will begin to decline, usually because they did something that caused their fans to realize that they too have feet of clay. And then the urge to recapture that lost glory kicks in. Whether it's through popularity, pleasure, or work, or even the philosophies and religion, human beings seek meaning and relevance in their lives. And we all, to quote a country song, are looking for love in all the wrong places. And I have to ask, how's that working out for you? Ecclesiastes 2 starts out and he says, I said in my heart, come now and I will test you with pleasure, enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. And he goes on to talk about the various different things he tried, seeking relevance, seeking meaning, seeking something in his life that wasn't all vanity. So he begins with the futility of pleasure and possessions. He sets out to find his own sense of meaning and purpose. And as I read this passage, I was reminded of all those people who are endlessly saying that they're seeking God. But I've noticed that throughout my lifetime, you would come across people who they say they were seeking God. The Beatles were famous for it at one point. But interestingly enough, they're all looking at everywhere but toward God. Like so many, the preacher sets out on an apparently intentional quest to try it all. He wants to leave no stone unturned, lest he miss out on the one thing that will bring him a sense of purpose and meaning. Don't we all at some time or another want to experience that or to know that our lives have had some sense of meaning? Don't we all just want to be thought of as more than a clump of cells drifting through life with no real purpose in sight. Or for just as many, we're looking for a way to feel something, as if we're numb inside. And I think this comes from the unconscious recognition that we were created for a better place, a better life, and we're desperately trying to find that life and that place. So the preacher begins where many of us begin, with the pursuit of pleasure and possession. But he says, behold, this was all vanity. This also was vanity. I said of laughter, it's madness, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine. My heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. And then later he says, I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of men. So first he tries to find meaning in pleasures. And isn't that where so many of us start? We look for something in the sensual or the physical or the emotional, especially when we're young. We tend to gravitate toward those sensual pleasures. How often I've heard of people in empty feeling marriages saying that they just don't feel the way they used to. I've always found that an unusual excuse for breaking up a marriage, or an odd excuse. I don't feel the way I did. Good night, I don't feel the way I did from one day to the next sometimes. Right? I mean, if it's all just about feelings, then I'm pretty sure I'd have been kicked to the curb a long time ago. And so they try to find someone or something else to bring back that old familiar feeling. Lena and I have often laughed because some of the people, we've heard this many times over the years we've had the misfortune of knowing many marriages that have broken up. And so often, unfortunately, ladies, it's the women that we hear it from, probably because women are more geared toward their feelings and whatnot. And then, we hear them say, I just don't get that feeling in the pit of my stomach anymore. It doesn't make my heart flutter. Lana says, is that love or the flu? You can't look around yourself today and fail to notice that virtually everything is geared toward making us feel good. Right? We have drugs and alcohol, sexual temptations of every sort, and virtual reality gaming if your real reality isn't enough for you. What's his name? Facebook guy. What's that? Zuckerberg. Thank you. Mark Zuckerberg has even invented Meta, the metaverse. And there are people that actually claim that they live their entire day, they're living their entire lives in this virtual reality of the metaverse. And virtual reality is no reality. They're so wanting to escape what feels like a meaningless life that they'll go and try to live in this fantasy world. And, by the way, Zuckerberg is quite happy to take your money and get you to spend things. There are people who buy metaverse houses, right? And buy all kinds of stuff in the metaverse, which tells me this: they're still not satisfied because they're looking for possessions even in a made-up false world. And yet, clearly, none of this brings satisfaction or meaning. The suicide rate is soaring. And it's especially high among those who thought that altering the very biology of their bodies would somehow bring them completion. And I see Satan sitting back and laughing because he tempted people to the worst sort of sexual sin, offering them hope of a better life, only to find the pits of despair opening before them and swallowing them up. drugs lure you in with the promise of making you feel better. Doesn't matter if you use them medicinally or recreationally. Drugs offer the hope of relief and deliver only misery and addiction. Many drugs that are promoted as wonder cures, such as heroin, marijuana, and antidepressants, do nothing but exacerbate the problems while masking the damage that they're doing to you. And for those who use them recreationally, the problems are even worse. People who use drugs to escape their problems only come down to find out that their problems are still there, and they probably have more problems that resulted from the time that they were under the influence of drugs. And again, Satan laughs, because there's no satisfaction in pleasure for the sake of pleasure alone. It's a trap. And he looked for possessions. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forests of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any other who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. This guy literally had it all, right? Everything he could ask for, he could get. Everything he did ask for, he got. Nothing was denied him. He even says later in the chapter, I denied myself nothing. He turns to accumulating things to find satisfaction. Pleasure is fleeting. You always have to find a new one. But possessions we can hold on to, right? Pleasure is going to go away. It comes and goes with our feelings, right? I woke up one morning, I didn't feel the same. But a possession, oh, maybe that'll help because I can hang on to that. That'll be there every day. But possessions are another lie. We as a society are so addicted to possessions that storage units are a major industry. You know, there are television shows about people who lost their storage units and all their possessions get auctioned off to somebody else who wants to buy their possessions. You got to really be into possessions, right, to buy somebody else's junk, right? If it wasn't worth enough for them to hang on to it, is it worth you spending your money on? Right? People seeking to accumulate possessions in a vicious and never-ending cycle of accumulation. We have an epidemic of hoarding junk to the point that they also make television shows about people who can't stop accumulating. Right? Well, probably heard of the show Hoarders. I've been in houses that I would have to call hoarder houses, where you had mountains of stuff and pathways through all the junk. Piles and piles of stuff, and when you look around at it, you look at what's accumulated in these piles, and you ask, why would you hang on to that to begin with? Your dearly held possessions look like what I throw in the dumpster every day. I had an aunt that was bitten with the hoarding bug to some extent. Walking into her house was like walking into a cavern. You had these narrow passages with high stacks of stuff. And you couldn't identify any of it. Wall Street brokers get rich off convincing people to put their hope in silver, gold, stocks, and portfolios, the treasure of kings and provinces. And yet we're not satisfied. Maybe real estate. Right? If I was wealthy enough to buy all the land that I wanted, maybe that would satisfy me. And then I could fill my land with cattle and gardens and I could build, these big. You ever see those luxurious gardens in England around the castles and stuff with all the hedges and all of that? Maybe if I had all that, it would satisfy me. And then, if I was that wealthy, I could have servants at my beck and call. I could have people do the work for me. Maybe then I'd find satisfaction. Remember that Jesus told of the man who accumulated so much that he had to build bigger barns only to die and lose it all to somebody else. It's true, the old bumper sticker, he who dies with the most toys is still dead. I look around sometimes and I've accumulated, you get to my age of life, to the age that most of us are, and you can look around and you can say, man, I've accumulated a lot of junk. And it happens to us, but it's not because I accumulated it so that I could have all this stuff. It had a purpose once, and now it has a purpose to share with somebody else. When somebody else needs it, here, please, take this junk off my hands. It's useful junk. So if you need some junk, let me know. I got some I can help you out with. But a couple of years ago when Lena and I started building our house, we intentionally built small. Downsizing and weeding and getting rid of stuff that we didn't need. And we still get rid of stuff we don't need. Because we live in a world that is geared toward accumulation. We live in a world that is geared toward having and possessing. But it doesn't bring any satisfaction. Bill Cosby once said, you don't own your stuff. Your stuff owns you. So if pleasure and possessions didn't satisfy, he had to move on. And so he looked for wisdom, and by alternative, folly. Because oftentimes after we've exhausted striving after pleasure and possessions, we gain some maturity. We begin to see that satisfaction can't come from the physical world. So if we're fortunate enough to survive that state of affairs, we turn inward. Perhaps there's a belief or a philosophy that will bring me satisfaction. And we're not yet talking about God or true faith. Far from it. It's way too early for that. We haven't finished seeking with our own resources. We're not ready to turn to God yet. But perhaps I'll find meaning in philosophers or some sort of religion other than God. He says, so I turn to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can a man do? What can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. And then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, and there's more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this is also vanity, for of the wise, as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and striving after wind. Man considers this philosophy and that philosophy. He reads and he contemplates, going from one belief system to the next, finding some value in some of them, but only madness and folly in others. Unless you think you're not part of that, we've all been influenced by it. In my lifetime, we've gone from what they called postmodernism to now the post-truth era, because postmodernism denied that there was truth. Having successfully killed truth, society has decided that there is now no truth and that they don't have to live by any truth, which is why you can deny that a woman is a woman or a man is a man unless you decide that you're a man or a woman or a cat or a furry or something. And it's all subjective and it's all good for me, but not necessarily good for you. And who are you to criticize me anyway? Because there is no objective truth. These are philosophies that our society's been poisoned by. So he thinks, he accepts what he likes and he rejects what he does not. And how often do we see that today? People accept a belief that they like to believe and they reject the things that they don't want to believe, no matter how true they might be. And some get lost in this pursuit, either endlessly looking for the one who will meet their needs or latching on to some false teacher who tickles their ears and pleases their minds. But there are no new philosophies under the sun. They're all merely a rehashing of things that have been around for centuries. New beliefs and religions are sprouting up all the time, but they offer nothing new. Examine every one of them closely and you'll find the same old trash wrapped up in some pretty new bags. Wisdom for wisdom's sake holds no satisfaction either, for in the end, if it is not God's wisdom, it is foolishness and chasing after wind. And as the teacher says, whether the fool or the wise man, we all end up under a cold stone and colder dirt. Hang with me, this is going to get better. The futility of labor, though, before we go there. And he now considers the value of labor, trying to bring satisfaction. And later, he'll in the book today, but later we'll discuss it, that he gives consideration to riches and the vagaries of life in general. But here, he seeks something that will bring him contentment and satisfaction, and perhaps that will come from the sweat of his brow and the work of his hands. Can he build or make something that will outlast him and ensure that he will be remembered well? Because none of us wants to be forgotten when we die. I think we all harbor a desire to leave something that will remind the world that we were here. He says, I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, thinking that I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool. Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave up my heart to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by somebody who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest, and this is also vanity. And again, remember that vanity in this sense, it's not just that it's vain or worthless and meaningless. It's that it's transient. It's insubstantial. It can have value, but it's not value that's going to last. Work has value. Work is important. But we have to always remember that the work of our hands isn't going to necessarily last long after us. We've all probably known workaholics, and we may suffer from that affliction ourselves. It may be that we're so engrossed in seeking pleasure or accumulating things that we have to work endlessly to be able to afford those things and those pursuits. And so we end up in a vicious circle, working and striving, laboring and seeking, only to never have enough time to enjoy the fruit of our labor. And in the end, that fruit is left to someone else who may not appreciate what it took to gain it. I've often observed that the reward for doing a good job is more work. And it's also an axiom that if you want something done, ask a busy man. But all that working and striving in the end is fleeting and insubstantial. And here's the thought for those who are seeking a lasting monument to their name. The Sphinx in Egypt still stands. But the question is, who built it? Nobody knows. I've seen many videos and watched some TV shows because I like archaeology, talking about the Sphinx, and nobody knows who built it. They don't even know why it was built, or what it looked like originally, because apparently it was altered at some point, besides having its nose blown off. Sure, some are remembered for a time and maybe even centuries, but the vast majority of all mankind will be forgotten by history. The Sphinx stands, and if the man who built it was building a monument so that he would be remembered for eternity, he missed the boat because nobody knows who he was. That sounds very depressing, doesn't it? But here's the answer. There's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. All right? Toil's not meaningless. It's just not lasting. And we can enjoy our work, and we can enjoy the pleasures of life, and we can enjoy the possessions that we find. Because this also, I saw, is from the hand of God, for apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For who is the one who pleases him? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to the one who pleases God. This also is vanity and striving after wind. Not that the pleasure that comes from God and serving God is vanity, but that the sinner's work is vanity. Satisfaction is found in the enjoyment of the good gifts of God. Too simple, you say? God gives us enjoyment. God gives us the pleasure we seek and the joy and the knowledge. But to the sinner, it's all striving after wind. To the sinner, it's left to see that all his effort is dust in the wind, and what he has is given to those who love God and are called according to his purposes. Augustine said this, and I'll finish. I panted for honors, for money, for marriage, and you, God, were laughing at me. I found bitterness and difficulty in following these desires, and your graciousness to me was shown in the way you would not allow me to find anything sweet which was not of you. In other words, there is contentment, satisfaction, and lasting benefit in our labors and our pursuits. But it's not found in the world or in the efforts of ourselves to find it. It's found in the sweet grace of God poured out on those who seek it from him. Our lives are only meaningless, are only vanity, are only transient from the perspective of a world that's dying and passing away. But from the perspective of a holy God, an eternal God who loves us and who wants us to enjoy life and who wants us to enjoy labors and work and the things that come of that, that's the lasting value. Remember that Paul says, it is your kindness that leads us to repentance, O Lord. So our value, the value we find in things is found in understanding the kindness of God when he gives us those things. Let's pray.